I'm Julietta Erickson, 34, and I worked my way up to a senior liaison post in the Army. No shortcuts, no handouts. For years, I showed up for my family without question. Paid bills, co-signed loans, flew home for every reunion. But when they told me I couldn't park in the driveway because it was for family only, I made a choice that shifted everything. Ever been dismissed by the very people you always showed up for? If so, drop your story in the comments, you're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand your ground after being overlooked, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next, you won't see coming. My name is Julietta Erickson. I'm 31, and for most of my adult life, I've been the quiet, reliable one in my family. The one who never made waves, never asked for much, and always showed up. We have an annual family reunion every summer, always held at my Aunt Carla's house in Northern Virginia. It's not exactly a tradition I look forward to, but I've never missed one. Not once. Growing up, my extended family was a tight and competitive bunch. My dad has 3 siblings, all of whom stayed in state and raised their kids in the suburbs around DC. My cousins are polished, high-achieving types, finance, law, real estate. Their lives follow a very particular script, and I never fit that mold. When I announced at 17 that I was enlisting in the Army, the room went silent. My dad looked mildly surprised. My mom just nodded like she'd known all along. But Aunt Carla made her opinion very clear. "You scored a 1450 on the SAT and you're throwing that away," she said, shaking her head. "You could have gone anywhere." I wasn't trying to make a point. I just needed a path forward that didn't depend on anyone else's money or approval. The recruiter had come to our school, and the way he talked about structure, purpose, and long-term stability made something click. I signed the papers the same week I graduated, shipped out that August, and started carving a life that made sense to me, even if no one else understood it. From the outside, my family prides itself on being close. Group texts, shared photo albums, inside jokes that stretch back decades. But what they call closeness often feels more like surveillance. They notice when you gain weight, lose a job, date someone new, skip a holiday. Every year at the reunion, they ask the same questions. When are you getting out? You thinking of doing something more stable? Do you miss real life? It's never mean-spirited, not exactly. Just loaded. They don't see the military as a career. To them, it's a phase, something underachievers or lost boys do until they figure themselves out. I stopped trying to explain the structure of my role years ago. It's easier to nod and smile and let them believe what they want. Even so, I never pulled back. Every summer, I brought food, helped organize the gift bags, and stayed late to clean up. When my Uncle Gary lost his job during a round of layoffs at his architecture firm, I covered their mortgage for 2 months so they wouldn't fall behind. I did it anonymously, wiring the funds through his credit union with a fake note attached from someone who believes in second chances. They still don't know it was me. My cousin Raina called me crying after she crashed her car during her first semester at Howard. I was stationed in Germany at the time, juggling my own bills and paperwork for my first promotion, but I co-signed a loan so she could get a used Honda and keep her job. She never brought it up again, not even a text after the final payment posted. None of it bothered me at the time. I told myself I was just doing what family does, showing up, helping when you can, not making a big deal out of it. And maybe part of me still hoped that if I kept giving without expectation, they'd eventually see me as more than the girl who ran away to play soldier. But year after year, the same dynamics played out. My cousins would talk shop, networking, deals, new job titles. I'd get a polite "thank you for your service" if someone remembered what I did. They'd laugh about my old Jeep, poke fun at the practical way I dressed, comment on how quiet I was. Aunt Carla once joked that I was just passing through the family, like a friendly neighbor, not someone who shared their blood. I stopped correcting them. I stopped bringing significant others. I stopped offering updates about my life beyond surface-level details. When I got selected for officer training, I told no one. When I was deployed for 9 months and saw things that still wake me up at night, I came home and smiled through the reunion like nothing had changed. There's something uniquely exhausting about being both invisible and essential. They never saw me clearly, but they leaned on me when it counted. Need a last-minute ride to the airport? Ask Julieta. Can't find a babysitter for a Saturday night event? Julieta's on leave. She won't mind. My parents, to their credit, were always neutral. They didn't discourage me, but they didn't defend me either. They occupied that quiet middle ground where love and discomfort coexist. My mom would forward job listings from defense contractors every few months, hinting that I should consider settling down soon. My dad mostly asked how my knees were holding up. Still, I kept going back. Kept parking on the curb because the driveway was always full. Kept answering questions I'd already answered 10 times. Kept listening to them talk about their kids' milestones while mine went unnoticed. I told myself it was easier to go along than to pull away. That keeping the peace was the adult thing to do. But last year something shifted. The reunion had been moved up a week to avoid overlapping with my cousin's wedding. I'd just returned stateside after an 18-month assignment that included a classified joint operation I can't fully talk about, even now. My team had worked through 6 time zones, 72-hour mission windows, and lost someone we all cared about. Coming back was disorienting. Civilian life felt artificial. Still, I flew straight to Virginia and showed up with a casserole and a folding table in my trunk. No one asked why I looked so tired. No one noticed the patch on my shoulder had changed. I was placed at the far end of the picnic table next to the kids. When I brought out my dish, Aunt Carla made a point of saying, "Oh good, someone brought the cheap mac and cheese." The kids love that. I laughed it off. I always did. But something in me was beginning to calcify. The more I gave, the less they saw. Not because they couldn't, but because they didn't want to. Seeing me clearly would require revising the story they'd already written, that I was the black sheep, the wanderer, the one who chose a hard life for no good reason. I think the turning point came that same night, when Raina passed me her phone with a picture of her new office. "You still doing that army thing?" she asked, scrolling through her photos. I told her I'd been promoted, that I was now leading a team of 24, that I'd recently gotten clearance for high-level briefings. She blinked like she hadn't heard me, then smiled and said, "Anyway, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. You should follow me." I didn't follow her. I didn't finish my plate. I drove back to my motel room and sat in the dark, not angry, not even sad, just done. And yet, a year later, when the group text went out with the details for this summer's reunion, I replied first. "I'll be there. Let me know what to bring." I started noticing the shift around the time I made first lieutenant. It wasn't obvious at first, just small things that didn't register right away. They still invited me to family events, still included me in the holiday emails and birthday messages. But something had changed in how they talked to me or didn't. The questions started fading. At one point, they used to ask about where I was stationed or what I did on base. I'd get polite follow-ups like, "Are you safe?" or "Do you have friends out there?" But slowly, even those stopped coming. Instead, the conversations started circling around each other. Tax brackets, promotion ladders, new software certifications, real estate investments. No one asked about my commanding officers, or the training I'd just finished, or what it meant to lead in a combat zone. I could sit silently through an entire dinner, and no one would even glance in my direction. One year, I flew home from an assignment in Korea with barely 3 days' notice. I hadn't been home in months and was still jet-lagged when I walked into the backyard and found the usual crowd gathered around the grill. My cousin Daniel had just passed the bar exam, and everyone was congratulating him like he'd won a Nobel. I set down a tray of cupcakes I'd picked up on the way and waited for someone to notice me. My aunt glanced over, gave me a small wave, then turned back to her story about Daniel's internship. I stood there in uniform, duffel still in my hand, and no one said a word. After 20 minutes, my younger cousin James wandered over and asked if I'd just come from the airport. I said yes. He nodded. "That's hardcore," he said, then drifted off to join a conversation about Bitcoin. That was the extent of my welcome. I stopped bringing my uniform after that. Not because I was ashamed, just tired of feeling like I had to explain myself. The last time I wore it was 2 years ago. I had just come off a brutal rotation that involved coordinating relief efforts after a natural disaster. We'd spent weeks sleeping 4 hours a night, lifting supply pallets, triaging civilians, and managing the psychological fallout of mass displacement. I had blisters on my hands and 3 infected bug bites on my left leg that hadn't healed yet. But I showed up to the reunion on time, in uniform, still in that wired mental state where everything felt just slightly too loud. I thought maybe they'd ask. Maybe someone would want to know what it was like, or even just say, "You must be exhausted." Instead, my aunt turned to my sister and whispered, "She always wants to make a scene." I heard it. Clear as day. I didn't say anything. Just kept eating my plate of pasta salad while pretending not to exist. They called me our little mailman in camo that year. Someone said it during dessert when I mentioned I'd just moved to a new base. Everyone laughed. I didn't. I just smiled politely and nodded. I wasn't sure who started the nickname, but it caught on quickly. "You still delivering letters out there? Tell Uncle Sam we said hi. When are you getting a real job?" Each one was framed as a joke, but none of them were funny. It became clear they didn't understand what I did, and more importantly, they didn't care to. My role had changed over the years. I wasn't just following orders or checking boxes. I was leading missions, overseeing logistics for joint force operations, managing real people in real situations. The job required intelligence, discipline, and more emotional regulation than most people could fathom. But to them, I was still the same girl who had signed up out of high school because she didn't know what else to do. Meanwhile, I watched them go out of their way to help each other. My cousin Emma got a job interview because Daniel pulled strings with a former classmate. My uncle helped Raina find a tax consultant when her side business took off. LinkedIn endorsements, shared contacts, glowing recommendations, they passed these things around like appetizers. But never once did anyone ask me if I needed anything. No referrals. No congratulations when I got promoted. Not even a, "How can we help when you come back?" At first, I thought I was imagining it. That maybe I wasn't open enough. Maybe if I spoke more, asked for more, they'd include me the way they did each other. So one year, I tried. I mentioned casually that I'd be retiring in a few years and was thinking about pivoting into logistics or project management. That I'd started putting together a civilian resume and was looking at graduate programs. My cousin Sean nodded slowly. "That's cool," he said, then turned to Emma and asked how her boyfriend's startup was doing. That was the last time I brought it up. After that, I pulled back without making a scene. I still came to events, but I stopped volunteering to stay late. I stopped offering to run errands or bring extra chairs. I made my presence smaller, more efficient. My job had taught me that quiet isn't weakness, it's strategy. You can learn a lot by watching who speaks, who's heard, and who isn't even invited to the table. The group text kept going year-round. Pictures of new babies, videos of engagements, links to news articles someone had been featured in. When I got a brief mention in a Department of Defense press release, just a line about my unit's coordination efforts in a joint operation, I thought about sharing it. I even typed out a caption. Then I deleted it. They wouldn't read it, and if they did, they wouldn't understand. The more I succeeded, the quieter they got. As if every new title, every added responsibility, made me harder to categorize. They couldn't tease me if they didn't know what to say. So instead, they said nothing. That silence felt heavier than any insult. My sister, Claire, noticed it too. We weren't especially close growing up, but she had a sharp eye for family dynamics. At one reunion, she pulled me aside while we were both in line for drinks. "I think they don't know how to talk to you anymore," she said. "You make them uncomfortable." I asked why. She shrugged. "You're out there doing things that don't fit their world. It's easier for them to pretend you're not." I appreciated the honesty, but it didn't change anything. Last year, just before the reunion, I was wrapping up a temporary assignment on the West Coast. I debated whether to go at all. I had just come off a grueling rotation, my body still adjusting to civilian hours, my head not entirely in the right place. But I knew if I didn't show up, someone would make a comment about me ghosting the family. So I packed a small bag, caught a flight, and arrived at Aunt Carla's house 20 minutes early. The driveway was already full, as usual. Cars lined the curb, SUVs parked like royalty on the grass. I pulled up behind a neighbor's mailbox and walked 2 blocks in flats that weren't broken in. My aunt met me at the door. "You're early," she said. No smile. Just a raised eyebrow. I offered her the tin of brownies I'd baked the night before. She took them without looking at me and said, "Kitchen's already full. You can put them in the garage fridge." No hello. No welcome. Just instructions. I spent the afternoon floating between conversations that didn't include me. At one point, I stood near the grill while two of my cousins argued over the best investment strategy for short-term rental properties. One of them turned to me and said, "You probably don't deal with this kind of stuff in the Army, right?" I smiled. "Actually, I've been managing multi-million-dollar supply contracts and coordinating international delivery schedules under time pressure for the past 6 years." He blinked. "Oh, huh." Then he turned back to the grill. By the time dinner was served, I felt like a stranger in my own family. I'd shown up, brought food, made conversation, even laughed at their recycled jokes. But it was clear I wasn't one of them, not really. Not in the way that counted. They had made peace with their version of who I was, and nothing I did was going to change it. So I sat in the far corner of the yard, ate my plate in silence, and watched the sky shift over Aunt Carla's perfect lawn. The same lawn where, in a few months, something very different would happen. Something that would break their silence for good. This year, I arrived at the reunion a little later than usual. Not intentionally, I just didn't rush. The drive from base had been long, and I'd stopped halfway through to change into civilian clothes, nothing flashy. Just a clean button-down and black pants. I'd learned long ago that showing up in uniform only drew the wrong kind of attention. The driveway was half full when I pulled up. I recognized the usual mix of SUVs and sedans. My aunt's Lexus in the middle like an anchor. A folding sign stuck in the grass read, "Welcome, family," in fading block letters, the same one she pulled out every summer. I idled for a second, glanced at the front porch, then put the car in park and got out. As I reached the steps, Aunt Carla came out with a tray of iced tea glasses. She paused when she saw me. "Hey," I said, offering a polite smile. She didn't smile back. "Can you move your car?" she asked, balancing the tray against her hip. "We're trying to keep the driveway open for family." I thought she was joking. I actually let out a small laugh. She didn't blink. Just tilted her head toward the curb. "You can park out on Waverly." Everyone else made space. For a split second, I considered saying something. I thought about all the years I'd parked in that same spot without issue. All the favors I'd done without being asked. All the weekends I spent helping clean out her garage or fix the wiring in her basement because she couldn't afford a proper contractor. I thought about the time I rewired her entire fuse box in 90-degree heat while she sat inside and criticized the lawn service on speakerphone. But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded, turned around, and walked back to my car. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back in flats again, my heels clicking on the sidewalk. I'd spent the last week coordinating training exercises for incoming officers. 12-hour days minimum. But here I was, sweating in the July heat, carrying 2 homemade dishes and pretending none of it mattered. Inside, the house was packed. The kind of crowded where you have to angle your body between conversations and carry your plate like it's fragile. My cousin Emma was already telling the story of how she'd landed her latest client, some DC lobbyist who needed help rebranding. She held court near the kitchen island while the rest of the family nodded and smiled at all the right moments. No one said anything about the driveway. No one asked why I'd arrived on foot. Aunt Carla walked past me once without a word, refilling the lemonade pitcher. I set the dishes down on the counter and stepped back, trying to find a place to exist. The living room was full of loud voices and polite bragging. Photos of my cousin's newborn were being passed around like rare currency. Someone popped a bottle of Prosecco when Daniel made a toast about his new condo renovation. I stood near the window and smiled when appropriate. Eventually, I ended up at the dining table. Most of the chairs were taken, so I stood behind Uncle Gary, nursing a small plate of whatever was left of the buffet. I don't even remember what I ate. Probably the green bean salad I'd brought. It was untouched. My uncle leaned back in his chair and looked up at me with a half smile. "Still playing soldier, huh?" I glanced at him. He wasn't joking. Just amused, like I was a kid who never outgrew dress-up. "Something like that," I said, and kept chewing. That was the moment. It didn't come with a fight or a scene. No one shouted or pointed fingers. It was quieter than that. Subtle, but absolute. A line had been drawn, and I wasn't on their side of it. I'd spent the last decade building a career on discipline, judgment, and leadership. I'd led operations most of them wouldn't understand if I drew a map. I'd been trusted with lives, resources, and high-level decisions. But none of that mattered here. To them, I was a placeholder. A helper. The quiet cousin who showed up with food and never asked for anything. I stood there for another 10 minutes. Long enough to hear my cousin Raina talk about launching a wellness brand. Long enough to catch someone joking that I should help her ship the orders since I was used to logistics. I laughed along with them, the way I always did. But inside, I was already packing up. Later, when everyone gathered in the backyard for the group photo, I was standing off to the side near the fence. My niece called out to me, "Aunt Julieta, come stand in the middle." But my aunt put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Let's keep it to immediate family, sweetheart. We'll do a second one after." I nodded. Stepped back. Let them pose without me. The sun dipped low behind the house, and someone turned on the patio lights. The smell of grilled corn and citronella candles hung in the air like a second skin. I watched the photo flash. Everyone beaming. Everyone framed just so. When they were done, no one called me back for a second shot. So I slipped back inside, found my purse, and left. No goodbyes. No plates to collect. No thank yous for the dishes I'd brought. Just the sound of the screen door clicking shut behind me and my own footsteps fading into the night. The walk back to my car was quiet. Just the hum of insects and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. That would come later. For now, it was something else, final maybe. Like the end of a long book I kept rereading, hoping for a different ending. I got into my car, sat for a few minutes with the engine off, and thought about the next step. Because something in me had shifted. And I wasn't going to ignore it this time. I didn't go home right away. After I left Aunt Carla's, I drove until the roads got dark and the streetlights thinned out. There was a cheap diner I used to stop at during high school, one of those places with peeling linoleum floors and coffee that tastes like metal. I hadn't been in years, but I pulled into the parking lot like muscle memory. Inside, it was nearly empty. A tired waitress behind the counter nodded at me, then went back to her crossword. I picked a booth in the back, slid in without taking off my jacket, and stared at the laminated menu for 5 minutes without reading it. Eventually, I ordered scrambled eggs and toast, even though I wasn't hungry. I just needed something to do with my hands. The silence hit me harder than the reunion ever did. Sitting there alone, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me, I felt something settle in my chest that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was just a kind of clarity that felt long overdue. I remembered the first time I bought groceries for Aunt Carla. It was during my first year in the army, right after I'd finished basic. She had called me, voice tight, asking if I knew anything about utility bill extensions. Her hours had been cut at work, and things were tight. I didn't even hesitate. I wired her enough for groceries and 2 months' worth of bills. She said thank you in the kind of voice people use when they're embarrassed, but relieved, and then we never spoke about it again. The next month, I got a card in the mail from her. No return address, just a simple note. Appreciate you. I kept it for years, tucked between the pages of my training manual. For a long time, I thought it meant something. That even if they didn't say it often, they knew I had their backs. I thought about the time Raina called me in tears 2 weeks before finals, her laptop fried after a spilled coffee incident. Her financial aid had run out, and she couldn't afford a replacement in time to finish her projects. I was overseas, halfway through a deployment, and I remember sitting on my bunk, scrolling through options until I found a refurbished MacBook that could overnight to her dorm. It cost me more than I should have spent that month. But I ordered it anyway. She sent me a selfie holding it, half laughing, saying I'd saved her life. She tagged me in an Instagram story with a bunch of heart emojis. That was the last time it was ever mentioned. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. That doing the right thing wasn't about being seen. But that night, alone in a booth with eggs going cold in front of me, I finally let myself admit that I had been waiting to be seen anyway. Waiting for someone to say, "She matters. She's one of us. We're proud of her." It never came. Instead, I got the driveway. I got only family. I got silence while they toasted each other and made space for every success but mine. My commanding officer once told me something that stayed with me longer than most of his orders. It was during a leadership seminar after a young lieutenant had broken down in front of the unit, overwhelmed by the constant grind of trying to earn respect from soldiers who wouldn't give it. "Don't serve where you're not respected," he said. "Respect isn't owed. But it damn well better be mutual." At the time, I thought he meant the job, the base, the rank structure. But sitting there that night, I understood it differently. You don't just serve on duty. You serve in the way you show up, the people you care for, the space you make for others, even when they don't make any for you. And I had been serving a family that didn't see me as anything more than useful. Useful when the car needed fixing. Useful when someone needed a place to crash. Useful when they needed someone quiet in the background to balance out the noise. But not valuable. Not really. The waitress came by and asked if I needed a refill. I said no. She nodded and left me alone again. I thought about how many times I'd chosen them. How many flights I'd taken on short notice. How many weekends I'd carved out between rotations just to be at those reunions. How many times I'd shown up and smiled through conversations that made me feel invisible. How many versions of myself I had suppressed in order to stay palatable. I remembered one year when I flew straight from a leadership training summit to make it to my cousin's engagement party. I changed in the airport bathroom, caught a cab, and arrived just as they were popping champagne. My hair was still damp. No one asked why I was late. No one cared that I'd come straight from something important. I was just another face in the photos. A body to help carry the gifts inside. And I had told myself again and again that this was just what families did. That showing up was enough. But that night, at that sticky diner booth with my eggs untouched, I realized something I should have realized a long time ago. It isn't just about showing up. It's about being counted. And I wasn't. Not really. I never had been. They'd made their minds up about me a long time ago. I was a nice story, a placeholder, the one who'd done that army thing and never quite re-entered their world. I didn't have a husband or a baby or a startup. I didn't have the kind of life they could brag about in Christmas letters. I didn't reflect anything back to them that they understood. So they erased me. Slowly. Politely. With silence and side comments and forgotten invitations. With only family in the driveway. I paid the bill in cash and left a tip big enough to feel like a statement, even if no one would ever know it. Back in my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and let the quiet sink in. I wasn't angry. Not then. Anger requires something to push against. But I felt clear. Like a cord had been cut. I didn't need to prove anything to them. I didn't need another year of swallowing my voice just to fit into a room that had already decided I didn't belong. I wasn't going to serve where I wasn't respected. And I wasn't going to keep pretending that silence was love. That night, I drove home with the windows down, the warm air rushing in like permission. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. 2 weeks after that night at the diner, I got a call from Major Dwyer. He'd been pushing for me to take a public-facing role for months, ever since my name started circulating on a short list after the Joint Logistics Initiative. I'd always said no. I preferred to lead behind the scenes, out of the spotlight. But that night had rearranged something in me. I wasn't chasing attention, I just didn't want to be erased anymore. "I've got something if you're interested," he said. "Special liaison to the Department of Defense. Media forward. Civil military ops. Visibility's high. Comes with perks." I didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." He paused. "That easy?" "Yeah," I said. "That easy." The paperwork moved quickly. My deployment schedule was adjusted. Logistics rerouted. It was the kind of post that came with ceremony, sometimes literally. A rare mix of optics and substance. You didn't request these assignments. They were offered. And when they were, you didn't waste the opportunity. I called in a favor. A small one. One I knew I'd earned. I didn't want anything extravagant. I didn't need a red carpet or cameras or headlines. Just one simple request for my next public appearance, a very specific kind of arrival. One that was already within protocol. One that wouldn't cost the army a dime, because the chopper was headed in that direction anyway. They just needed a reason to land. I gave them one. It was scheduled 2 months out. Coincidentally, or maybe not, that weekend fell exactly on the date of the next family reunion. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Claire. Not even Raina. I answered the group text like normal. I'll be there. I asked what to bring. Aunt Carla responded with plastic cutlery and napkins. No emojis. No, thanks. Just an assignment. I confirmed the ETA on the helicopter the week before. It would be returning from a demonstration in the area and passing within 5 miles of Aunt Carla's neighborhood. The landing would be brief. A 10-minute stop for optics. A thank you moment for continued service. My job was to be visible, shake a hand, smile at the camera, and then get on board. I agreed to every part of it. The day of the reunion, I woke up early and made a full breakfast. I ironed my uniform even though it didn't need it. I checked the weather, 85 degrees, clear skies, no wind. I drove to the reunion the same way I always did. Parked 2 blocks away. Walked up the sidewalk carrying bags of cutlery and store-brand napkins. My aunt met me at the door again, this time wearing oversized sunglasses and a visor like she was hosting a charity golf tournament. You're early, she said, taking the bags. You can help set up the drinks. Sure, I said, stepping inside. No one looked up when I walked in. Emma was already telling a story about her latest PR campaign. Uncle Gary was manning the grill. My dad was flipping through the sports section. Claire waved at me from across the kitchen, but she didn't get up. I helped unload drinks into the cooler. I smiled when prompted. I asked about babies and jobs and college acceptances. When someone asked what I'd been up to, I gave the same answer I always did. Still playing soldier. They chuckled. One of my cousins said, well, at least it's consistent. By 3 p.m., the backyard was full. Music from a Bluetooth speaker buzzed through the hedge. The kids were throwing water balloons, and someone had started a volleyball game. I stayed on the edge of it all, hands folded, watching the clock. At 3:28, I got the text. Landing in 5. I slipped away from the patio and walked toward the front lawn. The noise of the party was still behind me, someone laughing too loudly, a soda can cracking open. Then the rumble started. Low, steady, unmistakable. It took a few seconds before anyone else noticed. Claire looked up first. Her eyes squinted against the sun, trying to place the sound. Then Uncle Gary. Then Aunt Carla, who stepped out onto the grass with a frown. The helicopter came into view just over the tree line. Sleek, dark, and official. It hovered for a moment, circled once, then slowly descended toward the far edge of the lawn. By now, the entire family had gathered in a loose semicircle on the grass. People shaded their eyes, whispered to each other. Phones came out. The kids stared, open-mouthed. My father stood up, mouth slightly open, unsure what he was looking at. The chopper touched down with a practice thud. Grass flattened. Plates rattled on the folding tables. Then the side door opened, and a uniformed officer stepped out. Captain Erickson, he called. I stepped forward. Every head turned. I walked across the lawn slowly, calmly, not looking left or right. Not smiling. Not gloating. Just steady. When I reached him, I saluted. He returned it. Then he handed me a file folder and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, your presence has been requested for the final briefing in DC Command. Thanks you for your service. Thank you, sir, I replied, taking the folder. I turned once to face the crowd. Their faces were a mix of confusion, awe, and something else. My aunt's sunglasses were still on, but her mouth was open. My dad was staring like he didn't recognize me. Raina had her phone halfway up, too stunned to start recording. I gave a short nod. Nothing theatrical. Just acknowledgement. Then I stepped into the helicopter and let the door close behind me. We lifted off smoothly. I didn't look back until we cleared the house. From above, they looked like figurines frozen in a diorama. The party's still going, the grill's still smoking. But everything had shifted. The pilot glanced over at me. You okay? Yeah, I said, watching the lawn shrink. I'm good. Because for once, I didn't leave anything behind. No unspoken explanations. No invisible weight. Just a clear message. Not out of revenge. Not even to teach a lesson. Just to show them, without saying a word, who I had always been. And that I was done asking them to see it. When the helicopter first appeared over the trees, the backyard stilled in an instant. Conversation cut off mid-sentence. Forks hovered over paper plates. Even the kids stopped running. The noise from the rotors wasn't deafening, but it was unmistakable, an announcement, a disruption, a crack through the carefully curated version of the afternoon they thought they were having. The wind picked up as it circled. Napkins blew across the lawn. A bowl of chips tipped sideways on the folding table. Someone grabbed their drink before it slid off the edge. No one moved toward the grill. No one adjusted the music. It was like every part of the party paused. Then the voice came over the loudspeaker. Captain Erickson. It wasn't loud enough to startle, but it was clear. Sharp. Professional. The voice didn't say please. It didn't offer context. Just a name and a call. That was all it took. Every head turned toward me at once. The silence stretched. I stood slowly, calmly, brushed off the back of my uniform like it was any other day. No one said a word. My aunt's mouth was slightly open, a plastic cup still frozen in her hand. My dad stared straight ahead, his brows pulled in like he was trying to solve a riddle that didn't have an answer. Claire had her hand halfway to her chest, like she'd just caught her breath. I didn't rush. I didn't nod or smile or perform. I walked straight through the middle of the lawn, the same lawn where I'd once helped drag chairs out of the shed in the rain while everyone else waited under umbrellas. The same grass where I'd tied balloons, collected trash, carried trays, poured drinks. No one moved out of my way. But no one tried to stop me either. The wind from the rotors caught the edges of the tablecloths. Someone's baseball cap flew off. Still, no one spoke. I reached the officer standing at the open door of the chopper. He offered a crisp salute. I returned it. Then I stepped inside. The door slid shut with a practiced thump. We lifted off immediately. The blades kicked up one final burst of wind that sent plastic chairs tumbling and a couple of hats spinning into the hedges. I didn't look down at first. I sat, buckled in, adjusted my headset, and waited for the hum in my chest to settle. It wasn't adrenaline. It wasn't pride. It was something colder, steadier. Like a piece of me had finally clicked into place. When I did glance out the window, I saw them all still standing there. My family, clustered together in a broken circle, watching me disappear into the sky. They didn't wave. I didn't either. Back on base, the landing was uneventful. Standard. No cameras. No ceremony. Just a protocol drop-off. I changed into my regular fatigues, signed off on the manifest, and headed to the on-site office to check in. Major Dwyer called later that night. "You made an impression," he said, amused. "That wasn't the goal," I replied. Still, phones lit up. Some local official's kid was at the party. Words circulating. "I'm sure it is. You good with that?" "I am." And I was. Because it wasn't about making headlines. It was about flipping the balance. For once, I wasn't the one bending to be included. I wasn't waiting to be seen. I'd stopped asking. I wasn't sure what they were saying about me after I left. I imagined the stories changed with each person. My uncle probably told someone I joined a recruiting tour. My aunt might have insisted it was a PR stunt. My father, I guessed, said nothing. I didn't hear from any of them for almost a week. Then Claire texted. "You really did that." That was all it said. No judgment. No questions. I replied, "Yeah, I did." A few days later, Raina sent me a photo of her son holding a toy helicopter with the caption, "Says he wants to be like Aunt Julieta now." I didn't reply right away. Eventually, I sent back a thumbs-up emoji. After that, the silence stretched again. The family group chat went quiet. No more recipe links. No more passive invites. A few cousins unfollowed me on Instagram. I noticed. I didn't care. What changed was subtle at first, but it stuck. I heard from people I hadn't spoken to in years. A cousin on my mom's side messaged to say she'd seen a clip someone posted from the reunion lawn and had to do a double take. I always knew you were the real deal, she wrote. Hope they finally realize it too. A senior officer I hadn't worked with in nearly 3 years emailed me personally. Erickson, heard about your fly-in. Not bad. Reminded me of how you handled the port crisis back in 21. Steady. Sharp. Good to see you still have the spine for showtime. I wasn't trying to build a brand. But apparently I had. Meanwhile, on the home front, things started shifting. Aunt Carla left a voicemail I never returned. We didn't mean to make you feel excluded, she said, her voice tight. You know how we joke around. You've always been tough. Anyway, hope you're doing well. It wasn't an apology. It was damage control. My father called a week after that. I let it ring. He didn't leave a message. Claire and I started texting more. She didn't bring up the chopper again, but the tone of her messages changed. Less polite. More real. She asked about my upcoming post, sent me a podcast she thought I'd like, told me she was proud of me. Those 3 words felt heavier than the helicopter. I thanked her. Always knew you'd be something, she wrote. Didn't know you'd have to leave the lawn to prove it. I knew better than to think everything had changed. People don't rewrite their stories overnight. But I stopped making myself smaller to fit into theirs. I stopped translating what I did into something they could digest. I stopped showing up out of habit. The next reunion invite came 2 months later. Group text. Same format. Same tone. I didn't respond. Not with a yes. Not with a no. I just let it sit there unread. And for the first time in years, no one followed up. No one checked in. No one asked what I was bringing. I spent that weekend hiking solo in Wyoming. Cool air. Quiet trails. No reception. It was the most peace I'd had in months. Because this wasn't about payback. I didn't want them to feel what I'd felt all those years, unseen, unacknowledged. I didn't need that. I just needed space. And now, finally, I had it. Claire called 3 days after the reunion. It was early, and I was halfway through my first coffee when the screen lit up. I almost didn't answer, thought about letting it go to voicemail like I had with our dad. But something told me not to. Maybe because she'd been the only one who didn't look confused that day. Just surprised. Hey, I said. She hesitated. You have a minute? Sure. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then, the family's a little shaken. I let that sit. She went on. No one knew. About the chopper. About your role. They didn't even know you were still active. I never left, I said. I know, she replied quickly. I just mean, people are talking. Wondering if you did it to make a point. I leaned back in my chair. Sunlight poured through the window, cutting across the floor in long strips. I didn't do it to make a point, I said. I did it because they've made theirs for years, and I finally accepted it. She was quiet again. Then, softly, they're saying you embarrass them. I laughed once through my nose. By showing up? You know what I mean. I showed up like I always do. I just stopped shrinking to fit. There wasn't much to argue with in that. She didn't try. Instead, she said, they're old school. You know that. They don't always know how to talk about things they don't understand. I looked down at my coffee. That's not a defense. I'm not saying it is. I'm saying it's what it is. We sat with that. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Are you coming next year? No, I said. There was no drama in it. No hesitation. Maybe not ever. She exhaled into the phone. That's what I thought you'd say. You wanted to ask anyway. Yeah. I didn't fill the silence that followed. I'd spent enough time doing that in our family, covering the awkwardness, papering over what didn't get said. She spoke again, quieter this time. It's weird. You've always been around. Even when people didn't know what to do with you, you were just there. I know. They'll feel it. I hope they do. I mean it. They're not saying it out loud, but it hit them. I'm not interested in teaching lessons, I said. I'm just done showing up to be ignored. I get it, she said. And I believed her. We didn't hang up right away. She told me about work, the latest mess with Raina's boyfriend, how Emma was trying to spin the helicopter story into a compliment, something about how I'd always been a little extra. I didn't respond to that. Before we ended the call, she said, you know, I used to think you liked the distance. Like, you didn't need the family. That it was your choice. It wasn't. Yeah, I see that now. That meant more than I expected. After we hung up, I sat for a while, letting the morning stretch out. I didn't feel lighter, exactly. But there was a stillness in me I hadn't had in years. I didn't block anyone. I didn't send a grand goodbye message. I just stopped participating. The next birthday that came up in the family was Raina's. I didn't post in the group chat. No one noticed. Or if they did, no one said anything. Claire kept texting me here and there. Not constantly. Just enough. She sent me a photo of a bracelet she saw in a shop window, said it reminded her of something I wore in high school. I told her I didn't remember. She said, "That's okay. I do." A few weeks later, she asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. Neutral territory. No cousins. No family agenda. Just us. We met at a little place near the water. She was already at a table when I arrived, 2 coffees waiting. She looked tired, but in a familiar way. Real. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. She smiled. "Thanks for doing it anyway." We didn't talk about the reunion right away. We talked about her job, my next post, a book we both hadn't finished. It was almost an hour before she said, "They miss you, you know. They miss the version of me they invented." She nodded. "Probably. But they're starting to realize she was never real. That's not my job to correct." I know. We sat for a long time after that. No tension. Just a quiet kind of recognition. "I'm not asking you to come back," she said. "I just want to make sure you know I see you. For real." "Thanks. You deserved better," she added. I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I believed her then, too. We didn't solve anything that day. There was no sweeping reconciliation. No montage of hugs and group dinners. Just 2 people who finally spoke without all the history muting their words. She paid for the coffee. I walked her to her car. Before she left, she turned and said, "You ever want to spend time without all the noise?" "I'm here." I nodded. "I know." And I did. The rest of them stayed quiet. Or distant. Or confused. Maybe all 3. But I stopped needing them to change. Because I had. And the distance didn't hurt the way it used to. Not now that it was mine. That was 2 years ago. Since then, my life hasn't slowed down. If anything, it's accelerated. I accepted the public liaison role, and with it came more visibility than I'd ever expected. Media briefings. International travel. A seat at tables I once thought were off limits. It wasn't glamorous, not really. But it was purposeful. And I stopped apologizing for that. I still wear the uniform. Still do the job. But I don't walk into rooms trying to explain what I do in a language that makes other people comfortable. I don't shrink it down. I don't soften the edges. Outside of work, things are quieter. Simpler. I built a circle of people who see me without needing a title attached. Friends who ask how I'm doing without angling for a favor. Colleagues who trust me because of how I lead, not because of what I can provide. No one in my life now confuses proximity for entitlement. The last family reunion came and went without my name ever coming up in the group thread. Or if it did, I wasn't there to see it. Claire told me later they ended up having it at a park near Emma's place. Fewer people showed up than usual. My aunt brought store-bought cupcakes instead of baking like she used to. The energy was low, Claire said. Like something was missing, but no one could say what. She told me all this over dinner on her birthday. Just the 2 of us. No expectations. No agenda. She didn't bring up the helicopter. Didn't ask if I regretted it. I think she knew better than to try. What she said, instead, as we finished the last of our wine, was this: "They still don't get it. But I think they know they lost something." I didn't say anything back. Just nodded once. That was enough. Every now and then, someone from the old circle reaches out. "Hey, saw your name in that defense article. Didn't know you got promoted. Congrats. Did I hear you were on base with the Secretary of State?" I respond politely. Always. Short replies, kind tone, no invitation to continue. I don't owe them coldness, but I don't owe them closeness either. That's the part they never quite understood. Respect isn't given out of guilt. And it doesn't come from grand gestures. It builds over time. In the small moments. The invitations that aren't transactional. The questions that aren't loaded. The space people make for who you are, not just what you provide. I spent too long thinking if I just worked harder, gave more, stayed quiet long enough, someone would eventually pull me in and say, "You belong here." But that's not how it works. Belonging isn't granted. It's built. And it starts with recognizing when a seat at the table comes with a price too high to keep paying. Now, when I walk into a room, I don't wonder if I'm enough. I walk in knowing what I bring. I walk in knowing who I am, even if no one else does. And the difference? I no longer need their recognition to validate it. I don't regret showing up all those years. I know who I was back then. I led with loyalty. I gave without calculation. That was never the mistake. The mistake was waiting for them to do the same. And once I stopped waiting, once I stepped out of the pattern, I got my life back. It didn't happen all at once. There were still moments that pulled at old instincts. A birthday that passed without a message. A family post on social media I wasn't tagged in. But even those faded. They lost their sting once I realized I wasn't grieving a loss. I was clearing space. And in that space, better things grew. This past spring, I gave a keynote at a leadership conference. Before I walked on stage, the event coordinator asked if I wanted them to mention my family background. I shook my head. "They're not part of the story," I said. "Not the way they used to be." Later that night, a young cadet came up to me and said, "You carry yourself like someone who's never had to prove anything." I smiled. "I've had to prove a lot," I said. "Just not anymore." And I meant it. Because sometimes the loudest justice is silence. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that frees. I still get asked about the helicopter from time to time. Someone finds a clip or hears the story and wants to know if it was staged. If I did it to make a point. If I'd do it again. I always say the same thing: it wasn't about them. And it wasn't. It was about me. Claiming space I had earned. Reclaiming a voice I'd quieted. Walking away from a version of family that only knew how to take. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped crossing it alone. Now, when I think about legacy, it's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about what I've built without their validation. A career rooted in service. A life led by integrity. A name that stands, whether or not they ever say it with pride. So no, I won't be at the next reunion. And I won't be explaining why. Because I don't show up out of habit anymore. I show up where I'm seen. And that's enough. Thanks for watching. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Did you set a boundary that finally made people see you differently, or not at all? Drop your story in the comments and let me know how you handled it. And if this hit close to home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories about choosing self-respect over silence.